everyone, I'm Kirsten Moorfield. Welcome to People Are Complicated, a podcast produced by Cloverleaf, where we dive into all the ways that people are complicated at work and how you can turn those moments of tension into deep relationships and work that makes you proud. Stephanie Licata, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy for you to be here too. Last time we got to do this in person. This time you are not in town. You're back at your home in New Jersey, right?
Yes, that's right.
Awesome. Well, Stephanie Licata is, she heads up coaching and working with coaches for us here at Cloverleaf. So she coaches coaches. And we are going to talk today. We're continuing our mini series on the Boss to Coach playbook. We're going to talk about the hard stuff today. We're going to talk about hard conversations, performance management conversations, and motivating employees. So Stephanie, let's start out with the hard one. Why wait? Let's just dive right on into difficult conversations as a new manager.
No one wants to have unpleasant conversations in general in life. And especially if you're a new manager and you're in a work setting, it can be really nerve-wracking to have to talk about, constructive feedback, to have to explain that someone did something wrong or made a mistake, and can be really nerve-wracking for a new leader, and even for a seasoned one as well.
Yeah. I think it's the hardest part, really. I guess there's two hardest parts. I think navigating difficult change and hard conversations.
Yeah. And often the conversation is worse in our mind. Our anticipation of it is totally much worse than the actual conversation. And so that's part of what makes it hard, is we psych ourselves down, right? From how hard we think it's going to be, or how we're not going to be able to say something, or we anticipate what they're going to say or do.
And so different people avoid conflict for different reasons. Some people are just conflict avoidant because we are. Some people, it's because we're worried about hurting someone's feelings. Some people, it's because we just don't want to spend the time on it. We don't think it'll go well, or, there's a bunch of different reasons. What do you think is really deep down underneath that for people? Of why do we avoid these challenging conversations?
Well, so the first thing is, if we're sharing something, if we're delivering some kind of communication that's challenging or constructive, right? We're obviously concerned with people's feelings. We don't want to hurt someone's feelings, but the context of the relationship matters. So for example, if the leader and someone on their team already has a little bit of a contentious relationship, right? Or maybe they don't see eye to eye, then the difficult conversation can be perceived as a personal attack when it's not, right? So the listener, adds their own piece of, whatever their interpretation is, right? And so the context of the relationship definitely makes a difference. And so if it's easier to have a difficult conversation with someone who you have an evolved, trusting relationship with. So if that trust isn't there, if that basis of trust isn't there, then it can be a big challenge. So it's partly about who we're delivering the communication to and what the relationship is, and then what the fallout could be.
Totally. And then also with that is, what if you just don't really have a relationship established well yet, period, right? Like, what if you're new to the team, or they're new to the team, or, you just hired them and you're already noticing hey, you're showing up to meetings a few minutes late, or something where you're like, I should probably bring this up. It's a little uncomfortable.
It is, but it's all about the first sentence. It's all about how you start the conversation. So if I come to you and I'm like, Kirsten, why are you always late? It's different than I'm like, hey, Kirsten, can I talk to you about something? Oh, sure. One of the things I've noticed is that you've been arriving to, some of our meetings late. And I totally get that, you're really backed up right now. We're a really busy time. What support can I give you to make sure that you can be there on time? Right. So it's really about how you start the conversation that will determine how it goes.
Is there that was a really good example. Is there a favorite sentence starter that you have for particularly challenging conversations?
One of the things I do like to say up front is that there's something I want to talk to you about, but I want to get your perspective as well. So I'm letting them know in the beginning that they will have a voice, right? And I'm saying, hey, let me just compare notes on this, see what you think. Here's my take on it. And it's creating a level playing field from the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. I also appreciate in what you're talking about, you're assuming that there's another side of the story. Like, you're
Mhm.
not like, oh my gosh, why are they late? They're always late. That's what a terrible thing. Or like, hey, I told them to get this done on time. Or I told them to do XYZ by this time and they didn't. Or, like we can easily default to they weren't listening or they don't care or, like some kind of a judgment, right? Which I think is tied to why we don't like we avoid it because we don't want to hurt people's feelings because like subconsciously we kind of are like judging their character, which of
Oh,
course comes off as an attack, right?
yeah, absolutely. Because we know that if we actually said what we think, they definitely would get their feelings hurt, right? So
Yeah.
it's partly is like we know what we're thinking and what we want to
Yeah.
say, and we could be wrong. Remember,
Yeah.
the brain does not register assumption versus truth. Like,
Okay.
unless
What does that mean?
So if you have a thought, unless you consciously question it and say, is that the truth? Is that what's so? Your brain registered it as Kirsten is habitually late. If that's what I think, but the truth could be Kirsten is having a challenge on a project and someone's taking advantage of her and she needs support with creating boundaries, which is causing her to be late. Right. So I don't know that information. I said what I said because I'm giving the person the benefit of the doubt. I'm assuming that I don't have the full picture. And often we immediately assume that we do know the truth and our brain doesn't say, hey, wait a minute, that might not be so. Ask a question. Right. So as a coach, I'm coaching myself. That's why I'm doing that. So, but we have to kind of consciously do that with ourselves when we're talking about difficult things.
Gosh, that's such a good perspective, and it really comes down to we should be humble and question our own assumptions and like innately be intentional to see all of our people as valuable, especially like the ones where it's not easy to see them as valuable because they're really different from us or they're doing something that we think is wrong but we don't know why, those types of relationships, instead of letting it go to the norm, what like culture would persuade us to do, which is like just write somebody off or cancel them, right? But like actually say like, maybe this isn't that you're just the wrong fit for the team, maybe there's something else going on here. I want to approach this with curiosity, seeing you as somebody who's really valuable regardless of what your behavior was.
Right. Which
That's
is
hard.
a challenge. It's a challenge for leaders because we live in a world of like or dislike. So we don't like not feeling like we like someone, right? And the reality is someone might remind us of our like, annoying sister or whatever. And so we collapse that, right? We don't like the feeling of, I don't really like this person. And we have to get out of that construct as leaders. It's not about, you're not supposed to like or dislike people. You're just supposed to seek the entry point for which you can empower them. Right. And you have to almost put aside, it's at that next level of like or dislike isn't actually as important as, can I connect with this person to empower them, even if I wouldn't socialize with them outside of work?
To empower them. Yeah. Expand on that. What's the outcome of empowering them? Why is that the motivation?
Well, because ultimately, if they are empowered on my team, even if we're not each other's cup of tea, right? We've achieved something, right? We've gone beyond we've gone beyond, like you said, what socially we would, feel. If you didn't like someone in your social circle, you might not hang out with them, right? But you're kind of forced in these situations if you don't like a person on your team. And it's about, how can I empower them and how can I challenge myself to find something about them that I can promote or that I can highlight, right? Because you have to be thinking about their contribution to the team as a whole, not just your relationship to them. So if you can find a way that you can empower them, even if you both don't, again, jive so well, then they can actually still be engaged in their job, even if they don't have the kind of relationship they might like with you.
There's something that I'm thinking about that's related but different to what you're saying, but kind of related to what we were talking about earlier with we tend to like naturally judge people and be afraid, if we really said exactly what we were thinking, of course it would sound like an attack. I have this running joke with folks around, if I hear somebody say, I mean, she's a good person, but it's like, oh, you're getting at, subconsciously you understand that you're upset with them, you're judging them, but you're trying not to judge them, but you don't really like them, but you do like them. It's like this tricky, like, knot of emotions we can have around people because people are complicated.
Yeah,
so
they absolutely are.
Yeah. All right. Well, you were talking about empowering people, and when we really empower people well, they can do their best work, right? And that is ultimately best for everyone on the team, including yourself as the leader, because then your team does best, right? So that's a perfect segue into motivating our people. Why do leaders need to motivate their people? Why aren't people just motivated on their own? They got a good job. Just show up and do a good job, right? Why do we have to motivate people?
Look, 50 years ago, nobody asked that question. They were like, you should just come to work and do your job, and that's why I pay you. Like, that's that whole, that whole framework, right? Part of it is that the environment is contributes, the environment that the person works in contributes to how they will decide to give their effort, right? And so ultimately, in any kind of construct about motivation, we want people to give discretionary effort or to go above and beyond, right? So when people are very motivated, they give their reserves, they give part of their reserves. Now, we don't want them to drain their reserves, but they go sort of above and beyond, right? They don't do what that new thing, quiet quitting, right? Quiet quitting is like, I come at 9, I stop at 5, don't ask me anything after, I don't want to hear from you, right? And so that's usually a non-motivated person that's not really quitting, but not really engaged, right? Which is a good percentage of the workforce, unfortunately, right? Yeah. And so we want people to, in their mind, be people that think of, hey, if I did need to do something extra, like I would do it. And it's not that it's every time or every night I'm working late, but maybe if I did need to come in for an early morning meeting, sure, absolutely. I'll come in at 8:30 if that's what's required. It's a little something above and beyond. It's nothing extreme. But when people are motivated, they are more apt to give you some of their reserve, with as long as it still creates a healthy boundary for themselves and their lives.
And I think with that reserve too, it's not just about time of day or hours. It's also about when you're here, even if you have, really strict boundaries for your personal life, when you're working, how engaged are you in that meeting where you're trying to solve a problem? Are you just sitting back listening to people and not really thinking much about it, ready for lunch? Or are you like fascinated, how you can provide value, you're excited to be able to work on this with the people around you? Are you truly motivated? Like, do you feel energized by the work you get to do and how you uniquely get to contribute to it?
Absolutely. And are you growing, right? Or are you just like in the status quo? Like, are you professionally developing yourself and growing in your role and your knowledge and your ability to apply what you know? Are you growing, or are you stagnant? Right. And people that are engaged want to grow. They want learning and development opportunities. They want different experiences that are going to help them grow, not just to climb any ladder, but to have themselves feel continually more energized so you don't get bored.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in the playbook, we actually talk about a couple of specific ways around motivating people, and development opportunities is definitely one of them. How do you help somebody become motivated for their overall career? Like, how do I grow here? How do I grow myself? Like, that is just intrinsically motivating to people. We also talk about just in the day-to-day work, how can an individual leader get to understand what will motivate this person? What types of tasks are energizing to them? What things are they really interested in? Because no two people are exactly alike. And it's actually better if you can figure out, okay, this person is interested in XYZ types of challenges. So when that comes up, I know I'm gonna tap them and ask them for their input, versus I know they really loathe doing this kind of work. So I'm going to try to avoid that if I can, if there's somebody else on the team who can cover that. You can't always perfectly craft a job around somebody's preferences.
Absolutely. And well, first it's literally about asking them, right? You do have
Yep.
to ask them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I manage a team of coaches right now, and I'm having sort of end of the year conversations, and I'm asking them what would help them be a better coach, and
Mm-hmm.
or what do they want to see happen on our team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of that naturally brings out what people want to contribute, right? So sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you just have to ask them. You have to leverage the one-on-one meeting cadence that you have with people and make sure that you are regularly checking in with people about their ideas. Make sure there's room in team meetings for people to share their ideas. Now, you may not say yes to every idea, but you can put ideas on a parking lot and say, hey, you know what? We're going to look at that next quarter. Thanks for bringing it up. We're just going to put it here. We're going to revisit it. And
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to what people step forward for, right? So pay attention to what do they volunteer for. Look at their facial expressions, like when they're, when they're
Mm-hmm.
kind of like turning off, or when they're look at how they're engaging in a conversation. Pay attention to what people bring energy to physically, right? So you have to do that observance. And if you are a remote team, you have to work a little harder at that, right? You do have to go
Mm-hmm.
and have more of those direct asks if you're not going to be seeing people and physically as often. So you've got to ask people, you've got to observe what people are putting their energy into, what they're volunteering for, what they're stepping
Mm-hmm.
forward to do, and a combination of what organically happens and what you solicit from them will help you understand what's important to them and how you can motivate them.
Yeah, and even like how they approach their work. Like I'm thinking of two different people that I manage who just approach work totally differently. One of them is like, "Hey, just give me a week. I'm going to learn absolutely everything and I'll have all kinds of diagrams and information." And the other one is, "Hey, can we just sit down for 30 minutes, throw
Mhm.
spaghetti at the wall, and then I'm going to run fast after what I think might be the best thing." You know? And there's
Mhm.
different problems to solve where I want one of those preferences, one of those like just knee jerk ways of working. And getting to know that about your people is so helpful because actually not knowing that about your people can create some of this conflict, right? Like it
Mhm.
can create a need for difficult conversations if you notice that your like spaghetti thrower is thinking, what is the diagrammer working on? Like I'm not seeing any spaghetti getting thrown over there, you know? And your diagrammer could be thinking, oh my gosh, there's a ton of spaghetti. Don't you see how messy that is? Like, and you have to know, like getting to know these things about your people not only helps you motivate them, give them the right work, but it also helps you
Mhm.
to like coach your whole team on understanding and
Mhm.
appreciating the different strengths that each people bring and when to tap into each other and
Right.
ask each other for help for different skill sets, which aren't hard skill sets. They're just like how people's brains work and are naturally
Mhm.
wired.
Yeah, and a lot of that is a leader has to be consciously observing, right?
Yes.
And has to
Yes.
coach themselves to consciously observe, because
Yes.
if you are just doing work, if you are just managing people and you're not observing the process environment, the culture, you're not observing that and
Mm-hmm.
allowing that observation to influence how you lead, then you're leaving data on the table. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
leaving valuable data on the table that people are serving you up, that
Mm-hmm.
it's free, right? It's free
Yeah.
information for you to
Yeah.
develop your.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And to especially new managers listening, if you're thinking, my goodness, how much pressure. That's so much I have to pay attention to and learn and think about, but I also have to like get work done and, all these other new challenging things. It's something that I would encourage shouldn't be received with a lot of pressure, but just something to have on your mind and be observing over time. And I think when conflict comes up, is actually a great time to recognize these things. Like, why is this person approaching this situation this way? That always gives you insight into, okay, how does their brain work? And now it builds an understanding of what they love, because what they
Mhm.
loathe is a sign of what they love, right?
Right.
It's
Mhm.
the inverse, right?
Mhm.
And you can just over time start to build this understanding of all your people, and it will actually remove so much work and emotional effort
Mhm.
in the long run for everyone on your team, the more you can understand
Mhm.
everyone's deep down motivations.
Oh, yeah. And as leaders, we just have to make sure that we are also engaging in enough reflection
Mm-hmm.
of, because sometimes that data comes to you all day long and you can't
Mm-hmm.
process it. So you've got to just be able to ask yourself at the end of the day, like, what did I notice about my team? What did I learn? Like, you have to be able to do that self-reflection and store that information somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed for me often, like it's the thoughts that will pop in my head as I'm falling asleep, because that's the only time in my day I'm not distracted. Or sometimes when I'm driving, I'll just turn on like classical music to just let my brain think, and
Right.
those things will pop up where I'm like, oh yeah, I am kind of concerned about that. I do want to talk to that person about that. Or, oh yeah, that person did crush it there. I'm going to totally let them know. Like, just voice to text there in the car, like,
Mhm.
hey, text so-and-so, blah, 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 right? Like,
Right.
we do, that's a really, really good call out, and something I think is really counterintuitive, that as leaders, you actually need to build in silent white space to just
Yeah,
think, right? And
absolutely.
let those thoughts percolate. It's not always about just getting done, even though I want to. I just want to
I
get
know.
things done, right?
100%. No, that's why I have 466 notes hanging out in the iCloud, because that's what I do. I'll grab my phone. I'll be like, remember this thought?
Do you ever go back and
So,
visit those? That's a lot.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll be like, I'll remember and I'll search someone's name and I'll find it. Like, I have like an encyclopedia of like reflections and things I have to follow up with that are in there. Like, I'll think about it at the same time at night and I'll just grab it. And, whether it's feedback or an idea or something that I've observed about something that's going on that I want to capture, because those moments are fleeting.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't capture it, it won't happen. So,
Wow. 466. I would just
yeah.
be intimidated by that amount. That's amazing. All right. So we've talked about challenging conversations, uncomfortable conflict conversations. We've talked about motivating. Let's talk about performance management. This is our last topic of the day. And it's only a bajillion-dollar industry. How much work and tools and thought leadership and so much effort around performance management, and so much loathing around the processes. And it's just like, oh my gosh, performance management. So much to be said about it. But it actually shouldn't be a task you have to check off, or a process you have to go through once a year, once a quarter, whatever your organization sets up. It should actually be an ongoing mentality for every leader, which again is not, I don't mean to should and say you should do more, but it actually is something that if you can hone your thought process around it, it will really set you free. It will really set your people free to do their best work, which is best for everyone on the team. So Stephanie, talk to us about, how should we think about performance management?
Okay, so first I'm going to tell you how not to think about it, and then I'll tell you how to think about it. So
Great.
the first thing is that not to think about it, like you said, it's not event-based, right? So it's not an annual thing. And the second thing is that it should never be a surprise. So a performance evaluation or a conversation should never be a surprise 4 weeks later. Right. So part of effective performance management is giving feedback in as much as real time as you can. Now, obviously, you can't always give feedback in the moment. It might not be appropriate. You're in a group setting, but you have to deliver that feedback in a timely fashion, so that when you do get to a performance type conversation, that maybe again is more of an annual process. There, like every company has their own process, right? As many companies as there are, that's how many processes there are. This is an area that I've worked deeply in for the past 5 years. I've gone into companies and ripped apart their process and helped build them a new one. And the key to it, though, is you cannot have a performance management process that is built on straight up evaluation, right? It has to be through creating the relationships between leaders and their teams. And there has to be a construct for that. Now, I am biased about this, but what I say that is that you have to give your leaders coaching skills, because performance management really should be performance development, right? We're just managing people's performance, right? It's got to be about performance development. How can I develop this person to perform at their best such that it serves them, our team, and the organization, right?
Yes.
And so we have to give our leaders coaching skills, and we have to give people tools and learning that is coach-like in nature so that they have a container for some of these thoughts and some of this development.
Absolutely. And what's running through my head is this is so much of this playbook that we are doing this mini series on, because so much of it is how to be a good coach, how to have challenging conversations, how to give good feedback, how to ask good questions, how to be an active listener. All of those skills feed into what culminates in performance development, which is sometimes hard feedback. Most of the times it actually should probably be positive feedback. Hey, you crushed this. You're really good at this. How can we are you interested in more opportunities in XYZ? Should we look for this for you? What do you want to take your career to? It should be a lot more positive than critical and ways that you need to get better, right? Focus on the strengths, not the weaknesses, and you'll get so much stronger. And a lot of that is, of course, not a one-time or event-based thing. It should be in the moment. It should be after they led that meeting that you shoot them a message and say, you did great in the way that you did A, B, and C. Thank you so much for taking that on. So that when that time comes, when they didn't do something great, you can have that basis of trust, like you were talking about a few minutes ago, Stephanie, so that you can say, hey, there's something I want to talk to you about, and I want to make sure I get your perspective too. I saw that XYZ happened. It created ABC outcomes. It wasn't a good outcome. Talk to me about what you're thinking here, right? Like, that's a performance management conversation. Absolutely. And it should be happening weekly, really. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And that's the thing. If you're not having regular scheduled conversations, and most organizations will create a structure where you're having some kind of regular touch point, but it's those touch points have to be just as transformational as they are transactional, right? So it can't just be pushing the tasks around or checking in to see if something's done. It really does have to include some relationship building, some development. It has to include some of that. And when it does, then it creates a balance. And then that's when you're managing performance on a regular basis.
I read something when I was probably 24 years old that has just stuck with me ever since. And I've probably talked about it on other episodes, but it was a really short Harvard Business Review article that was like, hey, when you're giving feedback, don't do the feedback sandwich where you're like positive, negative, positive, because then they only listen to the negative and they never take your positive seriously. But instead say, hey, here's why I want to invest in you. And so here's the area where I see you can get stronger. And I love that, because while I don't always start every constructive conversation as, I want to invest in you, like ABC, I don't say that, but me as the leader having that mentality and the person I'm leading really trusting that that is my motivation, that I actually want to invest in you. I want you to grow. I know where you want to take your career. I know what matters to you in this role. I know what excites you. I know what is hard for you. I know what relationships are challenging for you and draining to you. And I know these things for you. And therefore, there's a way that I see you can strengthen, and I want to help you there. So I'm going to give you this feedback. And when somebody knows that, it's not a defeating conversation. It's actually an upbuilding conversation, even if they don't feel good about it in the moment, right? Because there are hard things that we all need to grow in. And I want the challenging feedback right back from my people. Like, hey, Kirsten, the way you did XYZ made me feel this way. And it's like, oh, shoot, I'm so sorry, right? Like it should be an open two-way street, because that really builds the trust, where they know you really are there to invest in them. You really are there to help them get to their next best level.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. Approach of what you just mentioned, of why I want to invest in you. I think that's great. And I think in order to get there, right, to be able to say that, we have to go back to the beginning, what we were talking about motivation. We have to know why we want to invest in them. So if we really want to manage performance, we have to sort of almost master that motivation piece. We have to be able to have the difficult conversations. And then when you can do those things together, you're actually managing performance.
It all comes together, Stephanie.
It all comes together, full circle.
It all comes together full circle. All right, Stephanie, well, is there anything else that we have not talked about that you would like to cover?
Just that it's so important. It's very easy to dismiss some of this in the name of busyness. So I just want to encourage organizations, leaders, like this, everything we just talked about and the capability that we just talked about needs to be part of job descriptions. And it needs to be part of the job description needs to include able to motivate and understand what motivates your team, able to deliver courageous feedback, right? Interested in innovative ways to manage performance. Like these things should be part of job descriptions so that when we are elevating leaders, we are putting the right people in the right seats. So.
Yeah. And so that leaders understand this isn't just a good concept. This is actually required. This is how I am viewed as successful in this role. I am as successful as I can make my people. All right. Well, Stephanie Licata, thank you so much for joining us again here on People Are Complicated. And we have just one final episode coming after this on the final 3 chapters of the Boss to Coach mini-series that we're doing. If you haven't yet downloaded the playbook, go to cloverleaf.me, download that playbook. It is super practical. Stephanie mentioned a couple of her favorite sentence starters for challenging conversations. There's even more and so many more tactical, practical, helpful tips in that playbook. So I highly recommend you go download it. Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
See you next time. That's all we've got for you this time. Thank you for tuning into People Are Complicated. I'm your host, Kirsten Moorfield. If you are enjoying this podcast, please tell your friends, leave us a review, help more people find it, because we believe that we're all human and we all can grow from a better understanding of ourselves and each other at work. So if it's helpful to you, please help other people find the podcast. Tune in next time as we dig more into the tensions we all experience at work and how those moments can guide us to actually having better relationships at work and doing more impactful work that we're actually proud of. We believe that every team can love working together, including your team. So go to cloverleaf.me to sign up for a free trial where you can have unlimited teammates, take free personality assessments, and see how those assessments turn into daily coaching nudges in your inbox to transform the way you work. Thanks, everyone.